10, Mac 10, at Fiend's house. Throw the strap, then I'm running in the fiend house. We working, yeah, we working. Niggas sitting on their ass, they hurting. They hating, yeah, they hating. They ain't never in the streets, they faking. I ain't got shit to prove, I'm a real nigga. Still posted on the 8. Couple years later, Pops got the juice. Go to sleep, wake up, out in blue now. We working, yeah, we working. Niggas sitting on their ass, they hurting. Back then, they ain't want me. Back then, they ain't want me. Back then, they ain't want me.
Back then, Black Murray's off the black wood. I've been flexing all my life, this ain't shit new. Back then, we ran the city, ex Detroit news. Freedom TTO, boys, the white bubbles out there. Back then, bitches hating me, they still mad. Foreign kicks and foreign belts, cause I don't fuck with bags. Back then, I had hundreds, now I play with rats. Back then, I was going, bitch, I still do that.
Back then, it was rainy days. Stuck in the spot, had the traffic days. Jew rolling up, Ro had the K. Shit was moving slow, we only made a stack a day. Tez had the loud, Hill had the white, D had the east. Hef was hitting pints, Scurry been the shooter. I ain't talking dice. Them hitters with me, nigga. Don't lose your life.
Back then, they ain't want me. Back then, they ain't want me. Back then, they ain't want me. Been the man since back then, still can't stop me, nigga. Back then, I was robbing niggas. Back then, I was so alone. Now these hoes on my dick won't leave me alone. Free Jew, free Scony, Donnie, free Quan. Free Tez, free Lenny, free the whole squad. Money on the floor, on the mattress. Money on his head, pussy on the stretcher.